By the age of 3 or 4, children have come a long way in their development. In their play, language and reasoning, a real gap is being bridged between infancy and adulthood. How did they get to this point? Is it simply a question of following a biological plan? Do babies really start with nothing? Or are the foundations for development in place at birth? We're still a long way from solving the puzzle, but some of the pieces are beginning to fall into place. Over the last 20 years, one of the most important changes in child psychology has been an increasing realization of the sophistication of the infant's starting conditions.
At this age, the normal child is barely beginning to coordinate his eyes and hands. He fixes his eyes on objects presented to him, but he makes no move to pick them up. For this simple action involves a more complex mental process than he is yet capable of.
By the age of 1, it seems the infant has achieved a great deal.
I think people are now concentrating more on infancy than they were because psychologists began to suspect that infants had more competence than we thought they had originally. Second, and I think this is essential too, psychologists realized that there were new techniques that we could get at pre-verbal intelligence. Most of the really interesting techniques 30 years ago used language. You can't use language with a 3-month-old. You use the way it looks at the world, the way it attends to the world by sucking harder and so forth. So I think both from a technique point of view and from a history of psychology point of view, there's been a new focus on infancy.
Every foot of this film has been indexed, studied and analyzed by Dr. Gassel, his associates and his students in order to identify the particular patterns of behavior most characteristic of each stage of development.
For years, film has been used to monitor and record the activities of babies. In the last few years, video and computers have helped researchers devise new ways of revealing infants' abilities which had previously remained hidden. Here, the researchers are investigating the development of short-term memory in 4-month-old Jonathan. On the middle screen, whenever beeps are heard, either circular shapes or square shapes will appear. He has a simple rule to learn about what happens next. Can Jonathan learn that pattern?
The infant is sitting in front of 3 computer monitors, and on the central screen we show a fixation where we try to get the baby's attention with that. And once the infant's looking at that, we start a trial, and that involves turning on the middle screen to a different design, which is either circular shapes or square shapes. Then what happens is there's a gap, and either the left or the right comes on. What's happening is if there's circles in the middle screen, then always the right side's going to come on. And if there's squares in the middle screen, then always the left screen's going to come on. So we're seeing if the babies can learn the pattern and to associate the middle pattern with which side's going to come on next.
Adults will find this a straightforward rule if it's explained to them. But can a baby at only 4 months learn this rule and without any explanation? Jonathan is given a learning period of just a few minutes. In anticipation, he looks to where the next picture is going to appear. It seems he has learnt the rule.
You can't ask a baby questions to find out what's going on, and just in the past few years, this computer equipment and video equipment has been able to be interfaced so that you can actually just show visual stimulus to babies and see where they're going to look and record their looking times to see eye movements, what they're going to do with different things that you're showing them. So the methods have changed a lot in the last few years to enable experimenters to be able to do this kind of work.
Tests of the 4-week-old infant show that he has little physical control. His hands remain clenched, and he grasps objects only by reflex action. He has not yet achieved much coordination of head and eye movements. He can fix his eyes on a moving object, but he has not yet learned how to turn his head from the side position, which is natural at this age. His exploration of the world around him begins with his eyes. Later, it will continue with eyes and hands. At 4 months, the baby can turn his head from side to
Once
side.
thought of as just simple reflexes, these examples of behavior are now being used to show us more about an infant's mental world. They can pinpoint quite specific abilities, like the infant's understanding or recognition of its caregiver.
Oh dear, that's a bit cute.
So, Bob, would you like to turn Harriet round so she can see the screen? Thank you.
An infant's suck on the dummy triggers the computer to play moving digital images. Some of the time, Harriet can produce her mother's image, at others, that of a stranger. It's Harriet who's controlling how often she sees them. Even in the first few weeks of life, infants will change their rate of sucking when their mother appears. This is an indication that at least some features of a mother are being recognized as different from those of strangers.
Hello, baby. Hello, baby. Hello, baby. Hello, baby.
Does the discovery of these early abilities undermine the importance of development and learning?
No, not at all. On the contrary, these are the very sort of basic core foundations. But everything has to be built up from that. If you take objects, three-dimensional objects, babies are probably born with the ability to detect edges, to detect shapes and things like that. But they have to build up representations of a table, a chair, and so forth. No child is born with that. Those are our cultural objects that the baby has to learn about. What the baby is given by nature, we think, is some starting points, some predispositions that allow it to work out the initial things and then build on that.
These triggers, or starting points, can be quite specific. This is just a set of random dots. And now the same dots, but organized. A few visual cues provide an immediate and striking experience. We know straight away that the dots evoke the movement of a walking human. Is this because of the knowledge we've built up about bodies and how they move? Possibly. But young babies are also triggered by these images. Although they don't necessarily know it's a human walking, babies under 1 month can distinguish the walking figure from the random dots. They will regularly show a consistent preference for one moving pattern rather than another. What are the implications of this sensitivity to biodynamic motion and the many other early abilities? For many philosophers and psychologists, the infant was seen for a long time as a blank slate, an empty vessel to be filled with knowledge, a tabula rasa. These sorts of findings from developmental research are now challenging that simplistic view.
We've got to find some sort of middle way between these two ideas of a totally tabula rasa, of a baby coming into the world with nothing, knowing nothing, and a very sort of preconceived, pre-structured baby who comes into the world knowing everything and waiting for triggers. What we really want to know is, are there some predispositions that allow the infant to capture some aspects of the environment over others, so that their attention is captured, say, by human language, by things in the visual world like human faces. Those are the sort of predispositions that the child has. But the child, one, learns very fast and an enormous amount during the early months of life. And two, the environment is essential to even get those predispositions off the ground. They can exist and not be tapped into, and they won't develop at all. So the notion of a developing child is essential.
At the age of 2, many children have already spoken their first words. Although his shyness disguises it here, Sebastian has a small vocabulary and the beginnings of simple sentences. But as psychologists have shown, his path to becoming a language user started much, much earlier. At only a couple of months, Sebastian's life was filled with his parents' language, with baby talk.
Like those fingers.
What could he be gaining from this experience?
What we know from experiments with babies is that from the moment they're born, they distinguish human language from other sounds. And you can do that by putting headphones on the baby, having a non-nutritive dummy, and then having the baby listen first to, say, any old sounds, and then suddenly a human voice will come in, and looking whether the baby just continues sucking because it's bored with sound input in general, or whether the change in sound from speech to non-speech or vice versa, it sort of attracts the baby's attention and makes them suck harder. So at birth they do that. After only 4 days they distinguish their mother tongue from other languages. So if it's an English-speaking infant or in an English-speaking environment, the baby will distinguish English from French, English from Russian, English from Japanese. But it won't distinguish Russian from French. So what it's picking up are the real patterns of its own language and distinguishing those from others.
You? Oh! You? Pull my hair, you are. You pull my hair. You are.
So as an infant, Sebastian had abilities in attention, in face recognition, and in his attunement to language surprisingly early. With these striking findings, is research taking us back to the view that much more of development is innate? If so, what role has his environment played? Was Sebastian simply picking up the words and structure of English from the speech of the other people around him? Or was there something special about the way they behaved towards him?
We used to think that language was really completely developed within the social environment. Then came a long period where everything was innate, and one didn't have to worry about anything to do with the social environment. I think now the tables have turned again, and we're going to have a much more subtle view of the input to the baby, the way the mother draws the baby's attention to things, the type of language the mother uses.
Who's that?
At only a few months, Alice may have highly attuned language abilities, but her parents are providing a unique framework, a contrived conversation easing her into the world of communication.
Hello. Hello, Dolly. Hello. Good girl.
It's important when you're looking at caregivers and infants to focus on what both parties are doing and not just one or the other. From the point of view of the caregiver, in linguistic terms, they are really speaking a new language. Now, if you gave me a 3-month-old right now, I could do it. I find it difficult to do just in an adult setting. There's something that we call motherese or baby talk or parentese, to be correct, I think, where we use very, very exaggerated contours. Let me try anyway. Hello, Richard. That's a telephone. Isn't it a telephone? So we repeat a lot, we point a lot, we exaggerate certain syllables of a word, and we exaggerate the ends of sentences and things. Now, we know from research that babies pick up on that very quickly. That's the way they distinguish their mother tongue from other languages. Motherese gives them that in a very, very exaggerated form.
However well attuned the newborn is, learning a language is a genuinely two-way process.
I'd say something and give her space to talk back. And because often she'd join in, and then instead of carrying on with her joining in, I'd suddenly realise, oh no, actually, hey, she's talking to me. So I'd shut up. And then, so we'd develop, I suppose we developed over the time. I mean, this sort of question-answer, response thing where I would wait for her to talk back to me and really give her the space. And then eventually she'd fill it. And so hopefully she was just realizing that communication is a two-way thing and that it's fine and you can overlap and everything, but basically you give and take and you give and take, and that's what she does now.
There's some nani. Or do you think Dolly wants some pasta?
It has now been shown that we are well prepared to become language users. It's also clear that the development of those early abilities is not inevitable. The framework that Alice and her mother have built up is one that started way back in early infancy.
The psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott used to say there's no such thing as a baby, by which he meant in order to understand early development, one has to think of baby in relation to mother and vice versa as a working system. Now, in studies of infant development, tracing them through to later life as well, one of the important features that seems to come through studies is something which in a way accords with common sense, to do with a mother's sensitivity towards her infant. And the question is, what are the most important features of such sensitivity? Now, one aspect of that is the degree to which a mother or father can attune to an infant's state at any given time. And they may be bringing out the infant's abilities, as when the infant is trying to do something, and the mother can link in and interpret the child's own intentions and help the infant in fulfilling those intentions, sometimes helping a child with anxiety that's difficult to manage, or calming the child when the child's distressed, and so on.
This system is not just tied to infancy. It accompanies the child through development. By the age of 3, most children will be broadening their social horizons. The parent-child system is being opened up. The child is building a much wider set of social relations. Ironically, although developmental research has shown previously unexpected abilities in the infant, it has also thrown new light on some surprising inabilities of the 3- and 4-year-old.
Well, 3-year-olds are very competent at things such as language skills. And they also have quite a few social skills. They are beginning to interact in coordinated play with their peers. When you look at very young children, say around 1.5 or 2 years of age, there are many instances in which those children do things that strike you as odd, and it's very clear to you that perhaps they're not thinking about things the same way that you are. By the time children are about 3 years of age, they often seem quite competent compared to a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old. They have a very good use of language. They are starting to tell you about things and engage in narratives and things like that that make them look quite competent. However, psychologists have discovered that there's a whole realm where 3-year-olds have difficulties.
These difficulties aren't to do with the child's ability to reason about the physical world. They aren't about subtleties of language development. They're difficulties with some of the most day-to-day activities.
Well, psychologists were interested in how children develop an understanding about the mind. How do they find out about other people's minds? What do they know about their own mind and other people's minds? And as adults, we constantly appeal to mental states to explain and predict the actions of others. So we appeal to beliefs and desires, emotions, intentions. And when psychologists began to look at children's understanding of the mind, they found out that children don't seem to share this same kind of understanding. And this came as quite a surprise because we take it for granted almost that we're doing this all the time. As adults, it's such a commonplace thing to do that it's hard to imagine that someone else wouldn't be able to do that. What's in here? You know what's in there? What's in there? Smarties, that's right. Good job. Okay, shall we open it up? Oh, what's in there? Pencils? Colorings?
Children of around 3 certainly seem to generate odd explanations of even their own beliefs and how they change.
Now, when you first saw this tube all closed up like this, what did you think was inside here when you first saw it all closed up like this? Good job. Good job. Shall we play another game? Would you like to play another one? Well, the Smarties task is looking at whether children can tell you that they've had a previous false belief about something. So, for example, when I show the children the Smarties box at first, they think there are Smarties inside, and then they find out that there are pencils inside. And the key question is when you ask the children, what did you first think was inside? And a 3-year-old will often tell you that they thought there were pencils inside. So they focus on what they now know to be true, and they can't go back and recover their previous false belief. A 4-year-old doesn't find this as difficult and will quite easily tell you, oh, they first thought there were Smarties in the Smarties box.
That's a Smartie ball, isn't it?
It is. Now, when I showed you the Smarties box before, all closed up like this, when I first showed it to you, what did you think was inside there?
Smoothies.
Good job. Uh-oh. What's inside?
Sweets.
Pencils. No sweets, huh?
It may be the 3-year-old doesn't fully understand the question, but tests like this seem to point to a crucial deficit in the child's understanding of the social world.
Now, when I first showed you this, all closed up like this, what did you think was inside? Pencils. Good job.
Other people are rather important for young children. And insofar as a child needs to understand his or her world, that will involve understanding things, but also understanding the nature of people. And in certain ways, people are rather peculiar kinds of thing. In particular, they have minds. And the content of those minds, we as adults think of in terms of other people's thoughts, wishes, intentions, beliefs, and so on. And a young child, in order to understand other people, including the way other people treat themselves, may relate in important ways to how far the child has got towards understanding minds. That's also going to enrich the child's experience of the world.
Current developmental research is showing that the infant has a wide range of very early abilities. These abilities lay the foundations for subsequent development. However, for development to proceed, the child's relations with others will continue to be crucial. The child has to come to understand not just the physical world, but the human one. To understand other people, their emotions, thoughts, beliefs, and intentions, their minds. But ultimately, this process of understanding other minds is a two-way process, not least for the psychologist.
If you want to study children, be they young infants or adolescents, you've got to try and get inside the mind of the child. You've got to try and see the world the way the child sees it, hear the world the way the child hears it. And if you hear a child's response, don't categorize it as right or wrong. Try and understand what it means for the child at that particular point of its development in this particular context. That's the only way you'll really understand. It's a great challenge, it's not easy, but when you succeed, it's incredibly thrilling.